First name, Mr. Last name, Ass.
God damn it, you took my bit. Hello and welcome to the Pod People, the show where things happen and we talk about them. I was going to say Mr. Ass, Matisse Van Rossum, but Cleveland took that from me.
I am
It's low-hanging fruit, I understand.
Dennis. No, I'm Barry. No, I'm Hedwig. No, I think I'm Ben Sheets.
I'm the Beanst. There we go, that's the one.
I'm the Board. It's like the Horde, but Bored, because...
Oh, I see. No,
Yeah.
I didn't think that was good until you explained it.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for that.
like most things, they're better after you've explained them fully. I'm Cleveland Mosier, regretfully.
The Board. So we're here to talk about everybody's favorite master of the arcane and the confusing, M. Night Shyamalan. And we're talking about the Unbreakable trilogy. Even though Unbreakable is not really a horror movie, we kind of have to talk about it.
Yeah, I was going to mention this too. You know, like, even though it totally isn't a horror movie, we kind of have to talk about it because of the other movies.
Yeah, well, I mean, also, I do think in terms of M. Night Shyamalan, like, he's made a lot of very decisively horror movies. Unbreakable was his second film, so I do think it bears talking about in terms of his career, because I do think it's a significant movie in his career.
For a while, I would consider it his best. I don't know if it's aged the best, and we'll get into this a little bit more, but it is still very strong.
Yeah, in terms of his canon, I would agree. I think it does still have a lot of problems, and I think that The Sixth Sense is still a better movie, but only for the reason that it has fewer problems than Glass, and then his career just goes like really sharply downhill from there.
He has still continued to make movies though, because I guess they make profit, even though.
No, people love M. Night. For some reason, his movies always do really well, even though they don't have the greatest longevity. Like, I remember when Lady in the Water came out, everybody was super hype about it, but does anybody remember that movie?
I blacked it out, I think.
I'm gonna give a quick slight defense of M. Night.
Okay.
Obviously, there are exceptions to this. I think is very later of the bad streak are the big exceptions, you know, Avatar and After Earth. But I would say even when M. Night is bad, making bad movies, usually they're just a convoluted train wreck, and at least they have some entertainment value from that.
Trainwreck is a great word to describe that, and I think it ties in perfectly into the beginning of Unbreakable.
Hey, nice segue. I like that.
Snaps.
So Unbreakable could loosely be called a superhero movie before the superhero renaissance kicked off shortly thereafter. It stars Bruce Willis as a man who discovers that he is basically superhumanly invincible after he survives a train crash and is the only survivor. And he's contacted by a guy who really likes comic books who tries to tell him that he's a superhero.
Yeah, as films go, I mean, as M. Night's films go, it's probably the one I might recommend the most, maybe after Sixth Sense.
I would say that Unbreakable is his most grounded film.
Yeah, it's his most subdued in a lot of ways.
Which is
it's very it's very atmospheric. You know, he definitely lingers a lot of times within scenes to give them breathing room, time to contemplate a little bit, and I really appreciate that in this movie because it makes the movie as a whole feel much less convoluted than most of M. Night's other stuff.
Well, what I also like about it, and I agree with all of that, but another thing that I really appreciate about Unbreakable is that it exists at least Unbreakable does, I think, exists mostly in our world where there's a healthy dose of skepticism about people with superpowers, and it's not just something like any of the myriad of superhero movies where such and such happens, gives person superpowers, they go on to like be a do-gooder, you know? With this, there's a lot of room for doubt, and I think that's a huge arc of the story is Bruce Willis having to come to terms with the fact that he does have superhuman abilities, because a lot of it can be sort of put off to coincidence, and I think that that's what really grounds it in the real world, and that Samuel L. Jackson's character is seen as a kook for thinking that people with superpowers exist.
The way they frame Samuel L. Jackson's character's origin really helps with that a lot. His big character trait is he has brittle bone disease, so his bones are very thin and fragile. The first scene in the movie we get is of him being born, and they thought they dropped him because when he was being born, he was squeezed and it broke
his arms and legs. Yeah, I think the start of Unbreakable is very good. And what I like too is that with that, and then with a couple of other flashbacks with his early childhood, we still have not seen him as an adult up to that point. It's like you're getting these flashbacks to a character that you haven't been introduced to yet. That's kind of setting up that origin story for when we finally do meet him as an adult, which I think is really effective, especially trying to look at it from the perspective of coming into it not knowing the story and the legacy of the movie.
Yeah, and they really emphasize that skepticism that you were talking about earlier and how they portray him, because, you know, he's kind of reclusive in his childhood because he's so fragile.
Right,
and
he
he
can't
kind
go out and play, so he falls into a love of comic books.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think that framing is really strong.
And that he starts to believe that if there can be somebody like him who's overly fragile, more fragile than your average person, then at the opposite end of the spectrum, there must be somebody who is superhumanly powerful and strong.
No, definitely put a sort of a bow on that premise. The film's realism and grounded quality definitely makes those superhuman feats and those moments of fantasy that much more believable and more powerful for it. Like you really get that childlike sense of wonder when Bruce Willis's character does, you know, start, you know, achieving these great feats.
Right, and we've got his young son who pushes him to keep exploring, you know, his abilities, because obviously a child is much more inclined to believe in superheroes than an adult. So that's really the reason that he doesn't just write it off, is that his kid keeps pushing him. Like when the scene when he's lifting weights in the basement and they keep putting on more weight, and he realizes that he can lift like really ridiculous amounts of weight that he never would even try.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that method of framing it very slowly is such a good way of doing it. I think it's really strong in making it seem believable.
Yeah,
Right.
Its exposition isn't heavy-handed. All the events that occur feel relatively natural and you know, believable enough. And I think it's definitely the strongest point of this film.
What did you guys think of the child actor that played his son?
A little obnoxious, but in the way that a child would be, not necessarily from an aspect of bad acting or poor acting. That was fine.
Yeah, I kind of agree. Like a bit of, like Cleveland said, a bit obnoxious, but overall inoffensive.
Yeah, I didn't think he was terribly bad. I think bringing him back for Glass, which we'll talk about, was a bit more of a train wreck, but we'll get into that.
Glass was a bad choice, but yeah.
Spoilers.
We'll dig deeper on that. If you're M. Night Shyamalan, that's called foreshadowing, apparently.
Oh, okay. One thing I want to talk about Unbreakable that I really appreciate, especially in its subtlety, is the way that it's shot. I don't know if you guys noticed this, but a lot of times in the movie, there will be physical things in the frame that sort of create comic book panels.
Yes.
which is something that I really, really like, especially because they don't go out of their way to point it out. Like, it's not overdone or heavy-handed.
Yeah, in Unbreakable, it's great.
Right. Just the way that they'll frame something, it's like, okay, there's a door, there's a door framing the action. So it's like a comic book panel, because, the whole thing with Mr. Glass believing that comic books are, well, that was something that I didn't like very much, that Mr. Glass thinks that comic books are the last remnants of visual storytelling, and that they're the idea of superheroes comes from people throughout time having supernatural powers and them drawing it.
I mean, the framing was pretentious, but the point does still hold through. I mean, like, pictographic imagery came before the written word. I mean,
yeah, sure, but also by the time that comic books were a thing, there was also photography, and there was film. And it's like, the way he talks about it is like, it's the last remnant of pictographic storytelling, and no, it's not.
No, it's not the last remnant.
It's definitely not.
No, I would say that the original forms of pictographic storytelling are the last remnant of themselves.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Exactly.
My favorite scene with Mr. Glass in Unbreakable, well, not my favorite, but a scene that really stuck out to me is when he has a big comic book art collection, and he's a curator of this exhibition at a museum, and he has a rich guy that comes in to look at different selections of prints,
original comic artwork,
and he does a great job explaining
prints, but the original
drawings. The details of why a villain was drawn this way and why the hero was drawn another way. And then the guy says, "Oh yeah, this will be perfect to get for my kid." And Mr. Glass just
he flips his shit.
Yeah. I thought that was kind of, at first it bothered me, but in a way it really expanded the character in a lot of ways. It showed his insecurity of his beliefs.
Well, yeah, it's a sore subject for him that people still consider comics childish when he's literally built his entire life around them. It's good character development. Whether I agree with his opinions or not, it is the right way to set up his character. I think it comes as no surprise to anybody by the end when he turns out to be the villain. He does behave sort of villainously throughout. Doesn't do anything overtly villainous, but I don't think it's all that much of a twist when it's revealed at the end that he's the one who's set up all of the accidents all over Philadelphia to try to find that one, the single sole survivor. He has to find somebody who actually has superpowers.
Yeah.
So he can become the villain.
Yeah, I think, while it's not a surprise, I do feel it's effective. Or at least when I was very young and I watched it the first time, it definitely, when I was much more impressionable, it struck me very powerfully. Watching it, this last week,
it's hard to say.
It's very hard to say.
The movie's 19 years old.
But what I will say is the core mechanism of that, of him being a true comic book villain, is him destroying the train and whatnot. And the train events are understated enough, and when they are brought up, they're used as a mechanism to explain Bruce's ability. And they never feel heavy-handed or brought up for any reason. So
sure.
You never feel clued in on that.
No, I agree.
Which is good.
Yeah, and I think as a kid, much like you, and obviously the gap in years makes a difference, but it surprised me a little bit because he's Mr. Glass is framed as such a fragile mentor character in a lot of ways.
It is true. It is kind of hard to tell whether he's villainous or just sort of M. Night edgy.
Yeah. Well, and he almost has kind of a Professor X type of thing going on where he's trying to facilitate the development of
he's literally going around in a wheelchair.
Superhero. Yeah.
Right.
In that respect, it kind of surprises you. If we want to jump into the ending really quick a little bit more.
Yeah, I have nothing else to say.
I will say the ending is incredibly abrupt, and I think
and anticlimactic.
That's my biggest problem with the reveal of Mr. Glass as the villain is it happens so abruptly.
And it is very ham-fisted.
Well, right, yeah. Bruce Willis
Yeah.
goes to his exhibition, and he just goes into the back room to talk to Sam
The
Jackson.
open office.
The open office where he just has like blueprints and stuff for like blowing up buildings and shit, just hanging up.
Yeah.
You know,
Technical bomb-making devices.
Yeah, all the fucking news clippings from all of the accidents that have happened. It's just out. It's just out.
It's a potpourri of terrorism. Like it's just a whole visual,
Right.
You know,
And then
ensemble of I'm the villain, and it's so. And for such a film steeped and framed in realism, those moments.
and to have him do the villainous monologue about how every hero needs a nemesis, so he styled himself as a nemesis in order to find the hero that he can go against. But then for it to just end with Bruce Willis like turning around and walking out with tears in his eyes, and then a fucking title card explaining that he then went to the police and got Mr. Glass
It's like
arrested.
this,
and then the credits.
Mr. Glass's defining trait is he's supposed to be smart as fuck, yet he just immediately lets himself get apprehended.
Arrested. Yeah,
for
exactly.
This. It's like, what the fuck? You just undermine the whole development of
and
the
that
character.
like Bruce Willis is supposed to be like a superhero. Like we see him embracing that before that, you know, going out in his rain poncho, which is his version of the cape, because his only weakness is water, and the poncho keeps the water off of him or whatever, which is also extremely stupid. But that he embraces being a hero and like taking vigilante justice into his own hands, much like Batman. But then at the end, he just goes to the police like that. It's so anticlimactic.
Even then,
It's like it's almost like the original script had like a showdown, and then they ran out of budget, and they're like, oh fuck, we're out of money. Well, I guess we'll just end it right here.
yeah, like even for M. Night's like better films like this one and Signs and the rest, like there's just this weird through line with water where M. Night feels like he's the first person to ever be poetic about water, and
Right.
it's always bothered me.
And I think that it's a stupid weakness for Bruce Willis to have as well, because especially the way they originally frame it is like, oh, your bones don't break, you know, you don't get sick, you're really strong, but you can still drown in water. It's like they frame it like it's, okay, water does to you what it does to everybody else, but then it's like when he gets wet, he actually becomes physically weaker, it seems like. And that, I think, is incredibly stupid.
Yeah, they kind of play it fast and loose with the rules on how exactly that works.
Well, that's the thing about Unbreakable, is that, like, right as it's starting to really pick up its momentum, it starts to feel rushed. Like, they're like, oh, shit, we gotta wrap this up. You know what I mean? I think that's my biggest problem with Unbreakable.
And to Unbreakable's credit, it's nebulous enough, and it's trimmed enough that it's fast and loose playing with the world building is acceptable. Like it gets a pass.
It's when it stops being subtle that it stops being effective.
Yeah. I will say, you know, I'm glad that they didn't have a big climactic showdown in a lot of ways. You know,
same.
like obviously in a lot of ways you can't really do that,
I mean, the
because
answer was just not
Mr.
title
Glass
cards.
is brittle boned.
Yeah,
but
that's all it is. Just don't do sudden title cards. Just actually wrap up the movie.
Right, like let's see what happens, you know, instead of exactly like you said, just having title cards to tell us what happened after Bruce Willis walked out of that room with tears in his eyes, you know, which is also confusing to me because it's like he has throughout the entire film considered Sam Jackson's character largely antagonistic, but he seems so hurt and betrayed at the end when he discovers the truth that I just didn't buy. It's like, you haven't trusted this man from the beginning. Like, why do you feel so betrayed by him? But anyway, that's besides the point. Y'all want to rate this and move on?
yeah, we might as well.
You start, Ben.
So I think this is a really strong outing. I used to think it was M. Night's best. It hasn't aged quite as well as I was hoping, especially with that third act being so anticlimactic to say the least. But I do think it's a really strong movie, really well shot, really well paced. I'm gonna give it a 3.5. I think it's a solid outing.
I agree with that pretty much wholeheartedly. I think that if you can say one thing about M. Night Shyamalan's career is that he gets way too much up into his own head and loses the down to earth aspect that's needed for a lot of his stories. And I think that along with The Sixth Sense, Unbreakable does that the best out of all of his movies. It is the most grounded, and it is the most believable in a lot of senses. And I mean, hell, like Bruce Willis and Sam Jackson do a good job together. You know, they give good performances.
Oh yeah.
So it's definitely, I think, one of his best, if not the best. I'm also going to give it a 3.5 out of 5 overall.
Ditto that. Yeah, 3.5. I think younger me would have probably given it a 4.5, and adult me is,
Yeah, I think it has aged a little bit poorly, and I think
but not
that
too poorly.
not terribly. I think this trilogy hurts it, and we'll get more.
Yeah.
We'll get more
Well,
into
yes.
that. But the fact that they had to turn Unbreakable into a trilogy, I think, makes it age worse than anything else. But that's a unanimous 3.5 out of 5 pods for Unbreakable. And now let's move on to Split. I would say that this is the only one of the three that I think is truly a horror movie through and through.
Yeah, Glass was billed as a horror movie in a lot of ways, but it kind of abandons that premise, and we'll get into that a little bit more. But I would agree, Split is the most directly horror of the three.
It came out in Did it come out last year?
No,
Last year or 2 years ago?
no, 2016.
Has it been that long? Oh yeah, it was 2016. So Split came out a couple of years ago. It stars James McAvoy as a man with DID, which is dissociative identity disorder, I believe. Kidnaps 3 girls and holds them hostage in an undisclosed location for what is initially an undisclosed but sinister sounding purpose. I did see this movie in theaters and I thought it was okay. I think it has a lot of potential to be a really good film, but I think it becomes too much of a fucking M. Night Shyamalan movie at the end and does a lot to hurt itself.
See, in a lot of ways, this movie's funny because I agree with you, but in a way, I also think the opposite. I think this movie could have been an absolute train wreck if it wasn't for James McAvoy's excellent performance in it.
Yeah,
I think in a lot of ways he does a lot of the heavy lifting in this movie, considering he has to play so many different characters.
Yeah, I would say James McAvoy and the sound design. Some might disagree. I mean, like you could definitely perceive the sound design is a little bit too, impact heavy.
I would say the set design as well.
I think the set design is fantastic.
The sound design, and James McAvoy are powerhouses of this movie. I think that while ultimately I don't think this is one of M. Night Shyamalan's best movies, I do think that it has some of by far the best moments in any of his films.
Yes. I've had about a week to think about it, but honestly, I still feel the same way I did about it after the credits rolled, and I think that it's a good film in spite of M. Night Shyamalan. Every element I enjoyed about this film were not necessarily directly associated with direction.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
I think on the flip side, there were a lot of strong choices that were made within the directing style of this movie. I think the opening scene of this movie is pretty incredibly strong.
The pacing as well, yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
The way James McAvoy kidnaps the girls is shot just so tensely.
Oh, yeah.
And the way
all the camera work inside the car, the girl looking, like back behind the rearview mirror, and
seeing the takeout boxes dropped on the trunk, and then hearing the car door open and somebody sit down in the passenger seat, and then looking over and realizing that it's not the girl's dad and it's the stranger.
And it was nice because we get to look over with her. And
right. I think
nice
all of that was handled really well. I do think that there are some strong directorial choices in this. Like I said, I think I think this movie really had the potential to be by far the greatest thing that M. Night Shyamalan ever did, but he did that thing that he always does, where he has to play into his reputation after The Sixth Sense of every movie having a twist. Like, that's his gimmick, and I think that with The Sixth Sense, he got lucky. I think that that has ultimately been what hurt his career as a whole, is the need to have to be like a cerebral filmmaker and like take the audience by surprise, and usually that's what makes the movies that he's doing stupid in the end. I would say that of all the M. Night Shyamalan movies I've seen, which are most of them except for The Last Airbender and After Earth, the third act is almost always what makes the movie fail.
Yeah.
Except for things like fucking Lady in the Water and The Happening, which are pretty fucking stupid throughout. The Happening, at least in a funny way. But, but like, that's the thing, is that, and I think that Split is an excellent example of that, because I would say that for the like 80 to 90% of the first two acts are incredibly solid filmmaking. And most of it is carried by James McAvoy's performance, and that's one of those things where it's hard to say whether it comes down to the direction or whether James McAvoy is just such a good actor that he can be good no matter who directs him. That I don't know for sure.
Yeah, well, I mean, I will give M. Night some credit because he did write this as well.
Yeah.
So it is his vision in a lot of ways. Ultimately, some of that is his undoing in the third act, but throughout a lot of it, the directorial choices are very much in his ground because of that.
Yes, I will say that throughout the beginning of the film, I was fairly displeased by some of the world building. I think the setting associated with the girls was fine. I think that was fine, if not great. And with Crumb as well, like the approach to him, especially at the beginning, where we're not as keyed into what he is, and we sort of have to learn it through the girl's eyes. I enjoyed all of that. What I did not like was the world building with the therapist.
Yes.
I thought she was a nightmare, and I thought that was horrible writing.
Yeah,
like,
I agree.
And I avoided this movie for a good while because DID is like a legitimate condition, and hopefully that's the right word. I don't want to, piss anybody off, but it's a legitimate thing, and there are plenty of functioning people with DID, and to kind of turn that into a horror creature is kind of unfortunate to me. And I know that the film frames it differently than that, but I wanted to do a little bit more research on that and see like what the psychiatric community felt about this movie. And I found an article where they interviewed the person who was brought on as a consultant for the film. And by that, I mean they had 2 dinners with M. Night, wanted to have more chances to talk with him about the script. M. Night dropped contact with them, and the person, the specialist, was offering to do interviews with the actors and give them some more feedback and insight on it, and they weren't interested. So Shyamalan wrote this film without any real grounding or research from or input from like the psychiatric community on this film when he had the opportunity to. And I see that as a pretty big oversight. And it shows in the writing.
I don't have a huge problem with that. I'm going to be a bit hyperbolic here, but I see the desire to want hard realism almost as like similar to Neil deGrasse Tyson wanting all the stars to be accurate in the sky, like it isn't accurate in a lot of movies, but does it really matter as long as the movie is interesting? And movies don't necessarily have to be real,
I think the common ground between those two things is that it would be a problem if the treatment of DID was insensitive, and I don't think it was. Regardless of whether M. Night had access to an authority on it and chose to not use that or not, I do think that his treatment of the disorder is not insensitive. I don't think he made people with DID out to be monstrous.
The reason I think it
No,
works.
and I agree with that. He makes Crumb out to be monstrous instead, and I do appreciate that and
not
acknowledge
even not
that.
even specifically. facets of his personality are or more
Yeah.
more specifically, a single facet of his personality is truly monstrous.
Right, which isn't generally how D&D works, which again is fine, generally. But
I think he
ignorant
is
to that. And I think that's I think the word that I would use is it's not offensive, and it almost tries to in a way like glorify DID. I didn't hate it. It didn't really bother me, but I do think that it is a little bit more complex than just comparing it to like Neil deGrasse Tyson and his points on.
Oh, I was
using
being
science and
hyperbolic,
science
like I
fiction.
said,
No, I
but
recognize that, and but I think it's important to also recognize like there's a political difference as well. The scientific community isn't necessarily negatively affected when a action space movie where it isn't framed as realism is placed, but in Shyamalan's films, like there is a greater framework of.
Sure. I think a lot of that is
cerebralism.
mitigated in this movie because of how strong McAvoy's performance was. I think if they had a lesser actor, it would have felt more like a caricature.
Oh, this film could
than
have
it
been
does,
remarkably
you know?
cringy.
Yeah, no,
yeah.
I agree with that because I
Same.
think James McAvoy does a great job of not making that character out to be exactly what you just said, a caricature. He's not cartoonish. He's believable, and I think he's also sympathetic. I want to talk more about the therapist character because that's another big problem that I have with the movie, is that she's basically just Dr. Exposition. I think this movie would have been a lot stronger if it had been a singular location. If we had once he kidnapped the girls and took them to this bunker place, that we had just stayed there. I think you could have developed a lot of the exposition that this therapist just
I think a lot of that
gave us.
exposition still is even addressed with Crumb. Like, he mentions a lot of the same things, and I think it would have been more powerful if it was only just from him where that speculation would
I
have
agree.
remained.
I think M. Night probably had that for the same reason you were talking about with the ignorant stuff, is people don't know a lot about DID, and his intent with the therapist was most likely to try to give a more well-rounded portrait of what that is.
And I think
to have a simple
and in a way that works,
yeah.
but I wish it wasn't there.
Yeah.
And that's
It's
mostly because I
done
don't mind that the ignorance is there.
Well,
you know?
here's the thing is, like you said, that was utilized as a mechanism to try and defer from this just being a DID monster film, which is exactly why it should have been better researched. Like, for those sequences. Like, if that was the goal and the purpose of that character, then...
I see what you're saying.
You could have just had her presented, like, because you could have. It would have enhanced the realism to have the therapist instead just doing a lecture about DID, like having functional members of society with DID. And it would have been more realistic.
She
and I think
did
more
kind of have
no,
that.
she was doing a lecture about how DIDs were X-Men. Like, and she was just turning that concept into fantasy again. Like, and that's what I'm saying was bumbling.
I think
and
that's
silly.
and
it could just been the realism would have been better and fine.
I like the idea of her having her character as someone to be an advocate for James McAvoy's character.
Yeah, I think it's a good point.
Just to avoid those harmful generalizations that you're talking about. But where my problem comes in with her is exactly like you said, her needing to be the one who explains the idea of people with multiple personalities being X-Men, that the different personalities can manifest different physical traits simply by their belief, like that only one of James McAvoy's 24 identities has diabetes and has to have insulin shots, and none of the others do, or that some are nearsighted and have to wear glasses, or the idea that the 24th personality is a superhuman monster for some reason that is there to protect him.
She goes a little X-Men-y, but I do appreciate that there is still a healthy amount of skepticism towards whether the Beast even exists throughout, you know?
Yeah, I agree with that. That's the stuff I don't have a problem with. It's when at the end it's revealed that the Beast does exist and that the Beast can do everything that they say he can do, that I think the movie gets really stupid.
Yeah, it's less effective because of those sequences.
I'll reference something, another movie that we've talked about on the podcast, Red Dragon. Either Manhunter or Red Dragon, whichever, just the story. You have the Francis Dollarhide character who believes that he is becoming something more powerful and higher evolved than human, that he is becoming the Red Dragon or whatever. But in that, it's never really any doubt that that is a delusion. It's his driving motivation, and it makes his character interesting that he believes that there is this other persona of his that is more powerful than a man is, but that he is ultimately still human is what makes that character compelling.
And I totally agree with you. And I think the issue we come into here is DID is a mental illness. And because of that, I feel like a product of our time is walking on eggshells to not make that seem like a villainous thing.
Right.
Even
exactly.
if it's a villainous character. So I felt like M. Night almost felt he had to put that stuff in. I wonder if this movie would have come out a decade or two before in the 90s or early 2000s, if it would have been more of a straight just in the basement type of thing.
I think it's also a necessity that he set for himself in order to tie this into the Unbreakable universe. That's the problem.
Yeah,
it has to be, because at the end it is revealed that it takes place in the same universe as Unbreakable, that the concept of people having superhuman abilities is real. So if that was the goal the whole time, then of course the Beast does have to have superhuman abilities. It's what hurts this movie is that it has to be tied into Unbreakable.
Yeah, well, the problem is less that happened in the third act and more that it was, referenced with the therapist character.
Right.
I think in itself, having him actually become the Beast at the end is not a bad thing.
No, but that the Beast has superpowers. If the alternative was, we see a scene where he finally becomes the Beast and maybe goes on a bit of a rampage, but just as a man, and that the Beast is brought down by his failings of not being a superhuman, would have been a much more interesting conclusion to the film as a standalone.
I wasn't even bothered by that, to be honest. I think the problem I have with the Beast is they showed too much. I think
or just what they showed.
Yeah,
was weird.
I think having him be a larger than life supernatural entity is not a bad thing. I think that's a really interesting concept, actually. I think the problem is we see him crawl on the walls and on the ceiling too much.
Really
I think if it left more to the imagination, that would have been much stronger as a whole.
Well, even leaving it unclear whether he does have supernatural powers or not, there actually being something up for debate or up for interpretation, I would have even been fine with that. But like you said, it's what they show. It's having this otherwise extremely interesting, well acted, developed character with multiple personalities. You then have him fucking just getting real vascular and crawling on the wall and running back and forth in between the shadows and growling like an animal, and it's fucking stupid.
Yeah.
It's dumb as shit.
Yeah.
And also, let's use that as an opportunity to segue into the Beast's motivations for kidnapping these girls and what the Beast believes in, because I think that's another incredibly stupid part of this movie. The Beast believes that if you have never suffered, you are impure and deserve to be punished for that. But if you've had a hard life and you have literal scars on your body, that you are pure, and that he is like a messiah for those people.
What it made me feel like is, you ever hang out with a a shitty friend, and you're like, oh man, I had a really bad day today, and then they try and top your bad day.
They one up your bad.
Yeah, like I felt like that. Like this was like literally like you gain superpowers by one-ing up people's having a bad day competition.
See, I thought that concept was silly, but at the same time, as a part of Kevin, as a form of his psyche, it made a little more sense. Him suffering all of this pain and seeing it as a form of purity in part of his psyche in a way.
Well, I suppose so, but you get that from the fact that he has all of these other personas to begin with. Like we learned that his first persona, Dennis, the OCD persona, developed when he was a child because keeping everything extremely neat and clean was a way to keep his mother from flying off the handle and beating him, I don't have a problem with him developing all of these personas in order to protect his psyche. I think that makes sense, and I think that's good. But the idea that the epitome of that is a superhuman monster that believes that you are only pure if you have suffered, I think that is too heavy-handed and stupid. If anything, it should be that he develops that persona in order to lash out at those that cause suffering.
Mm-hmm. Like
rather than becoming an instrument of suffering.
Yeah. Like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde has been done. Like Fight Club has been done. Like those concepts have been addressed.
I don't know. Ultimately, like the way I saw it is, and they get into this a little bit in Glass, which we'll talk about, is the Beast said his primary goal was to protect Kevin. And as an element of his psyche, I feel like it shows the worldview in a lot of ways of such a broken psyche like that.
But it's not just to protect Kevin. It's to show other people who are broken and damaged that they are superior to everybody else. The Beast is supposed to be a messiah character.
Yeah.
The other members of the Horde who believe in the Beast worship him as such. And not to get too much into Glass, but in Glass we do see the Beast presenting himself to other broken people, supposed to be as somebody to follow. Mm-hmm. The idea of there needing to be a superiority aspect to it that I think is...
I guess if anything, I just saw that as a form of human spite towards people who haven't had pain like he has. And I can see that as an element of psyche.
It's not the theme that's the problem. It's not like the being broken can make you stronger. I mean, like, there's
I totally agree. The way it's presented is heavy-handed, 100%.
That's I think.
But I wanted to talk about a little more about that theme because I do think it's interesting, and I don't think it's necessarily stupid. I just think it's very heavy-handed how it's done.
Yeah, I think it's. I agree with you. I think the theme is not bad, but I think its presentation is kind of stupid.
I think it's really stupid. I think the presentation. I think if anything, that's why I'm bothered by it. Is because I think it is a cool concept, and it's done so ham-fistedly with him screaming about being pure because of this. Like,
and how he's about to kill Anya Taylor-Joy and sees the scars from her sexually abusive uncle on her body and just stops and lets her go because she is pure. It's an unsatisfying climax as far as I'm concerned.
The fact that he explained it after seeing it was the worst part for me.
Yes.
Like the thing is, it's so heavy-handedly done. I don't have a problem that it's in the movie. I have a problem in how it's in the movie.
Yeah. That's the biggest problem, yeah.
I think we all agree on that.
I agree with that. This movie is so strange for me because much like its core premise, the movie feels like it's two distinctly different films. Like it feels like it has DID. I think it has some of the best and worst moments of M. Night Shyamalan's career, and the high points are so goddamn high, but the low points are just so low. It ultimately makes the finished product so middling for me.
Same.
As much as the times that I'm enjoying how fucking good it is,
I'm also regularly groaning.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, this movie does not bother me as much as you guys, because I think it's so strong with James McAvoy that like it lets me give a little more leeway to the Shyamalan-isms, I guess you could call them, because I think he gives such a good performance. Again, does most of the heavy lifting to the point where it makes some of that less egregious in comparison to something like The Visit, for example, where you have a lot of the same tropes, but less of a strong central character to carry it.
Yeah, no, I can agree with that. Like, I've seen this movie multiple times, and I do always appreciate its good moments very much, and they do keep me entertained. Like, I can't even say that I dislike this movie overall, but it's the things that it does wrong that I think make them more egregious because of how close this movie comes to being a truly great film.
I agree fully.
And I'm gonna go ahead and rate it if you guys
go for it. Go for it. I think this is good time.
I think that this movie ultimately has more positives than negatives, but man, the negatives are really bad for me and always hamper my enjoyment of the film overall. I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5 pods. James McAvoy is incredible in this movie, and the way that he is able to make the different personas feel like distinctly different characters and not just one actor doing a bunch of different voices and stuff. Like his dedication and artifice in making that role believable, I think is truly masterful, and I think he's an incredible actor. But, you know, it's got its problems.
Yeah, I fully agree. I really wish I could just separate the two and just rate the film and then rate McAvoy's performance. McAvoy gets a 5 out of 5. Like,
yeah.
McAvoy's fantastic in this film.
I would agree with that.
The movie outside of that is a 2 for me. You really do have to wade through some real just groaning moments in this movie. But there are some really fucking fantastic moments. And again, Anya Taylor-Joy just does a wonderful job too. And
yeah, I think her character's underdeveloped,
that.
But I think she does a good job.
2.5. 2.5.
2.5? Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I guess I liked it the most out of all of us. I really think, again, McAvoy carries this. And I think without him, with a lesser actor, this would have been a train wreck.
Agreed.
But in addition to that, I think the art design and the design of the location is fantastic. I think the cinematography in a lot of this is really strong.
Agreed.
And going into it, the
score is dope as well.
Yeah, the score is very good. I think going into this with rock bottom expectations, The Visit was middling reception, but he was still coming off of the lowest of his lows. So I have to give him props for that. I think this movie is pretty strong. I think in terms of pacing and tension, I think it's one of M. Night's strongest, to be honest. I would give this a 4 out of 5. I think it's a very good
Higher
movie.
than Unbreakable. You think it's a better film than Unbreakable?
I think it has the luxury of not having the age to it. I wonder how this movie will age, but at the current time, I don't think it is a bad movie in any sense.
Okay. All right. Well, that's an average of 3.2 out of 5 pods for Split. And that will lead us into our final film, Glass. Which just came out when we're recording this. It came out like yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
If you haven't seen Glass, if you actually care about Glass, stop the episode now because we're going to be getting into heavy Glass spoilers probably pretty quickly.
Also, if you actually care about Glass, I'm sorry.
I mean, I can't. I won't go into bashing taste.
The one thing.
No. I mean, like, I'm sorry for you if you care about Glass and you're going to see the movie and you're excited about it. I'm sorry about what's about to happen to you.
The one thing I'll say,
I'm not insulting anyone's taste.
Okay.
Not, no.
Because I was gonna say the one thing I will say after Split, like, I would understand why people would be at least interested in seeing Glass, because M. Night made one of his stronger movies.
Oh no,
you
I
know?
was curious myself.
Yeah.
I'm sorry for my past self.
I think that's a great segue into my overall feeling about the trilogy before we get too into specifics with Glass. Is I think that Unbreakable and Split work their best as standalone, unrelated films.
I would totally agree.
The fact that they have to bring them together in this movie is what makes the entire thing fall apart.
In that respect, do you think when M. Night began making Split, he intended this to be a trilogy?
That's a great question.
Because I
Split,
honestly, I think he
so.
shoehorned that into the end of Split and kind of edited it into that.
I don't think so. Also considering the development cycle between the two films. Since it looks like Glass was shot fairly and written a lot earlier on. I'm sure
I don't know
that
though,
information
because I
exists
feel
out
like the red tape between two different IPs, because Unbreakable is owned by Buena Vista, I believe, which is a different company than the one that put out Split. So there's a lot of red tape combining two IPs like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean,
yeah, it's hard to say. I would be curious to see if that information exists out there, because I do think that aside from the very end of Split where they go into the diner and we see Bruce Willis's character and somebody's like, that's like that guy that they put away who thought he was a supervillain. What did they call him? He's like, Mr. Glass, and they have the same music.
And the whole time that cheesy dump, like music is playing.
Yeah, the super late '90s, early 2000s hip hop.
It's like trip hop,
yeah.
Well, I mean,
Other than that, Split stands on its own.
It does,
I
but
agree.
I do feel like it is tied in. Like going back to our conversation about like the through line, the theme about weakness making you stronger. I mean, that's Glass.
Well, and
I mean,
people have
thematically,
really,
I would argue that
the
a lot of
ham-fisted working in the superpower thing.
Yeah,
like,
I mean,
into it. Like
I
that's
think
what the film is about.
thematically, a lot of M. Night's movies have similar themes to that. I will agree with the therapist stuff, but I would argue, you know,
a great part of the film.
I told you earlier, or I mentioned earlier, I don't think I mentioned it on the podcast yet, but the original cut for Split was like 3 hours.
Right.
And he thankfully cut it down to a more reasonable length. But I feel like he probably added that in near the end of the production cycle just to
I think the world building is
in
built around that same premise, though. I mean, like the therapist is trying to sell that he's a superhuman.
Well, exactly. They cut that in and emphasize that more than they would.
Yeah, just
if
because
it was a standalone.
appears early in the film doesn't mean that it was added early in the film's production. They could have shot that shit at the end when he decided to tie it in and cut it in properly.
It's the through line of the movie, is what I'm saying. Like it's regularly brought
But
up
I think
by Crumb,
it's
it's regularly brought up
Split
by.
stands alone in a much different way.
Yeah, they're very different films.
it-
They stand alone. But I'm just saying that I think that the intent was there when Split was made that it would be tied into Unbreakable.
It's hard to say because all we have to go off of is the finished product, which does tie into Unbreakable.
Yeah.
It's impossible to say what M. Night's first draft of the script looked like.
Speaking of which, though, the first half of Glass especially feels like a feature-length epilogue
Oh my
to
god.
both movies. It feels like he's trying to wrap up every single bow and do it in such a redundant way that it just feels unnecessary.
boring.
No, I mean, like, I remember before we did this podcast, I remember saying, like, that M. Night was going to use this as an opportunity to just to ruin a greater work. Just imagine a scene in a bar where two people are saying, like, oh, man, like, you know, like, George Lucas really did a shitty job ruining the Star Wars franchise, and then just M. Night Shyamalan just saying, like, oh, hold my beer.
Like, yeah, well, let me show you what I can... Well,
yeah, like...
Well,
I think... I think
and Lucas did, like, but I'm just saying, like, just, this is just so unbelievably ham-fisted.
Well, that's the thing. My biggest problem with Glass is not only is most of it incredibly boring, but it takes all of the best parts of Split and Unbreakable and turns them into cartoons.
Yeah, and like copy-pasted lines from the previous films and like and states them
Used
multiple times.
Used footage from
it almost felt like
not even,
a
flashbacks,
like
but, like, just, to
Silent
pad.
Night, Deadly Night 2 style, where he just repurposed early footage to make a
there
movie.
were a lot of parts where they used scenes straight from Unbreakable, and the quality of the film, like, you could actually notice the contrast between, like, the ultra high def that they shot Glass in and the high def that they shot, or maybe they shot Unbreakable on film, I don't know, probably. But, like, you can see the film grain, like,
well,
it
it's
cuts
like on
between
the
two of them.
because like you get a shot on the train from the beginning,
very
and
end,
you see an interaction that occurs. There was obviously shot presently, and then it pans behind one of the seats, and it pans back across.
And you can see the moment, you can see the cut when the film grain comes in.
Yeah.
I even mentioned it. Yeah, it's this movie is a hot mess, and I was expecting it to be a hot mess going in, and I was hoping for a fun mess.
Yeah. And that grain point is such a is just the tiniest
thing.
tip of the shitty iceberg on this thing. Just for viewers, just wait.
I was really hoping for fun
listeners.
for fun dumb, and we got it. But well over an hour into the movie.
It was sprinkled in before that, but it definitely
Not
ramped
enough.
up in the second half.
Yeah.
I think the second half of this movie especially turns into an entertaining bad movie.
Absolutely.
On the level of, I would even argue it's on the level of like The Nun or The Predator in terms of enjoyable bad.
I would agree, but this movie is 2 hours and 9 minutes long, and I would say it does not reach that point
until the last half
hour. Until an hour.
Last
30.
45 minutes.
I would say an hour 30 in. There is stuff sprinkled throughout, like dumb little funny moments that we laughed at, but
too much rage for me to wade through in between all the rest of
but
that.
also
Oh my
like
God.
just so boring.
Well, I think, Cleveland, you were the most offended by this movie because I think in a lot of ways you're the biggest comic book superhero fan of
but
us three.
Absolutely.
I do want to begin by saying, like, it is, well, yes, a great deal of my anger does come from that.
Yeah, can you
It's
expand
also-
on that a little bit for
it's
us?
It's more primarily just because it's terrible writing and world building that made me so mad. And it's constantly stepping on its own toes and being so clunky, and the number of times people just actively reference how the film would be going if it was a comic book movie.
I will
was
agree.
Yeah,
That stuff I
that
found
is one
like,
thing I wanted to
annoying.
talk about.
That enough of its own was enough to like just to send me into fucking blackouts. Like I was just like the meta. It wasn't just the comic book aspect of it. It was just the worst like approach to meta in writing.
Yeah,
like,
that's what I
I've
wanted
seen.
to talk about because in a lot of ways there's a distinction between being self-aware and breaking the fourth wall. And I think this movie, in a weird way, is breaking the fourth wall a lot without being self-aware.
Poorly. Yes. No. I've got
Yes.
I've got a couple of metaphors for that, and I fully agree with you. Watching this movie made me feel like I was having a conversation with a child who says to you like, "Hey, have you seen this really good movie?" And you think, "Oh yeah, it's an okay film, but I'll enable this kid
Humor
and
the
like
child.
I'll humor the child." And you say like, "Yeah, yes, I have." And the kid goes, "Oh yeah, isn't it really neat?" And then the kid just explains the whole movie to you that you've already seen. Like that's how I felt watching this film.
And then
Yeah.
I get exactly what
Yeah.
you're saying.
And so that's my first comparative. I was at a convention a couple of years ago, and I attended a writers panel, and it was pretty good. It was pretty enlightening. And afterwards, there were a few of the people in the audience, and I thought, hey, this might be a cool opportunity to make friends, build some cool business connections. And I started talking to this one random person who I overheard said they were writing for like a friend's like Cthulhu Lovecraft style game or something, a game that was inspired by Lovecraft. And I thought, oh, that's really cool. Hey, tell me more about it. And they told me some stuff. And then I said, like that's really neat. I'm a huge Lovecraft fan. Like, what's your favorite Lovecraft book? And they said, oh no, I've never read any Lovecraft. And I had to stop. And like, what do you haven't read any Lovecraft? Like, you're writing a Lovecraft game. Like, what are you doing? And there's like, well, I think that I'll go into it with a more fresh perspective if I haven't read any Lovecraft.
No.
And I'm like, no, you won't. Like, your fresh perspectives will still be there. Like, if you read Lovecraft, you'll just have a better sense of the source material and etc. Things we already know. I'm not going to explain the joke. You get it. The reason I'm bringing that up is I felt the same way about Shyamalan's approach to comic books in this movie. I felt like Shyamalan just didn't even realize that, like, the 80s golden age happened, where comic books became self-aware. Because this, especially like leading into this, you were saying that in an interview, Shyamalan said that he was trying to do a dystopian Incredibles.
Right. His philosophy behind the Unbreakable trilogy is the Incredibles, but dystopian.
Right. Now, honestly, just that on its own, in an isolated vacuum, I think that could be done and be kind of fun or whatever. It's a hokey, weird concept.
Why would you want to make the Incredibles dystopian?
Yeah.
Not the Incredibles, but that same like childlike sense of wonder, but put it in a dark environment.
DC cinematic universe has been doing that for years and failing.
Yes.
The only one who did it right, the only person who did it right was Christopher Nolan.
Right,
with the Dark Knight trilogy.
which it does do, and it is that.
Correct.
So there's my.
But also,
I have opinions on that, but
Sure,
that's another topic.
But also, nobody in the Dark Knight trilogy has real superpowers.
True. So right. So my point on that is that Shyamalan approaches this film acting as if he is the first person to have this premise of superheroes, but what if now? But what if actually in this world?
Right.
Whereas most comic books are framed that way already. Like, or if not many. Many comic books try to do that. That's a common mechanism to make you feel more like you're a part of the world. We were saying it's a strength in Unbreakable, even. But here, the point just becomes so missed. And all the times they're bringing up meta, it's from this pedestal of, I'm the first one to have done this. Like, oh, this must be the moment where this thing would be happening in a regular comic book. Or, oh, didn't expect this thing that happens in so many other comic books, did ya?
Well, the fact that he has to have the characters point out those moments to us.
Right, that's what I mean.
If he's expecting
regularly.
It's like, okay, well, you're obviously, like, this trilogy is your comic book trilogy. You would expect the people who are watching it to at least have a basic idea of how comic books and superheroes work, even if they are somebody who has not read a lot of comics. Like myself, I did not grow up reading comics. I have seen most of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, though. I am familiar with the formula of comic books. I don't need the characters in this movie to explain to me that this is the moment that in a comic book, the good guy and the bad guy would have a showdown. I don't need you to tell me that.
Right, and it's not the first time that Shyamalan has done this. We saw the same thing with Avatar, right? Avatar was a film. Well, I unfortunately have.
Yeah, I have too, unfortunately.
I saw it in theaters.
You mean The Last Airbender, not to be confused
correct.
with James Cameron's Avatar.
No. Dear, I mean, we're talking about Shyamalan. But, like, Shyamalan's selling point for Avatar was that his kids liked it. And he signed off on it because his kids liked it. And not because he himself had an interest in the source material, not because of any personal reasons or artistic reasons. It was just a cash grab, and his kids thought it was cool. So it was a periphery thing for him. He didn't actually engross himself in the world. Again, a running theme, right? Like, he doesn't do the research. He doesn't do the homework. It's ego. He builds the film off of his own concepts, and those are enough because he's M. Night Shyamalan. It's never been so apparent as in this film.
I actually agree with that. I feel like this movie doesn't feel like he was going into it trying to make a film. He was going into it trying to do the conclusion to Unbreakable and Split.
Which,
that's what it felt.
Which I think is why it feels like an epilogue in a lot of ways.
I agree.
A feature-length epilogue. I think it comes onto its own in the last 45 minutes or so, but not necessarily in a good way.
Well, that's the thing. It does become very comic booky and cartoonish at the end, which is by far the most fun part of the movie. It's also the dumbest, but at the same time, it's
the part where it breaks its own rule.
But and also, like, going off of Unbreakable and Split, it's putting those characters that I think were relatively grounded and real, aside from my problems with the Beast and Split and whatever, and putting them into this cartoonish setting where I never wanted to see them, you know? It was still fun and dumb, but ultimately, like, I this movie just felt like a mistake.
See, honestly, I disagree. I almost feel like it should have been more cartoonish throughout. Because I think the problem with the first half is it's too boring and it tries too hard to tie up those ends.
It would have definitely...
If it had held its own style of the last 45 minutes throughout, it may not necessarily have been narratively a great movie, but in terms of tone, it would have been a stronger movie and a more entertaining movie, I think.
Yeah, if it had been more cartoony from the beginning, it would have been an entertaining movie in spite of itself. It would have been intentionally entertaining. I think there are other ways they could have made the film entertaining at the beginning other than being cartoony.
Well, what I'll say is I agree that if the film had been more cartoony, I probably would have enjoyed it more just because it would have been hokier.
I would have too.
It would have been more fun to laugh at, and I think it would have made it ultimately a more enjoyable viewing experience. That being said, my point is I never wanted to see these characters in a cartoony setting.
Agreed.
If that's what you're gonna do, and that's what it takes to at least keep me from falling asleep during the movie, fine. That's why I enjoyed the last act of the movie, because it was dumb. But that doesn't mean I ever wanted to see these characters in that setting. You know what I mean?
I have no problem with them trying something different. You know, the problem is they didn't stick to it throughout. The problem is they tried to do what you were saying is stuck to the original formula in the first half, and obviously that didn't work very well. And then in the second half, they stray from that dramatically to make just a cartoony, over-the-top
I don't think the
movie.
first half was just bad because it tried to stick to its original concept. I think that it could have stuck to its original concept and been good.
Do you think so?
I do.
With this concept?
Yeah. No, I do think ultimately the concept is the problem because like I was saying before, Unbreakable and Split work very well as standalone films. It's the concept of bringing them together that makes the whole thing not work.
Yeah, it's inherently a convoluted mess. And if you're going to make a convoluted mess, at least make it schlocky and fun,
no,
you know? That's all I'm saying, you know?
And I agree with that.
I agree 100%.
But I do think that it could
that
have just not been a convoluted mess.
That doesn't change the fact that this movie should not have been made. That's my overall point. It was made, and if you're going to make us watch it, then it should be cartoony and stupid throughout, so it's at least entertaining.
Yeah.
I will actually agree with.
But it shouldn't be a thing to begin with. Is my point.
Ben had a counterpoint earlier that I do want to agree with, and that is that like I actually think that this movie being made could have actually been a good idea. Like, I wouldn't want to discount any new attempt at something for being bad because it was a new attempt at something. That mentality can often be used like by marketing teams to not like green light creative projects. Just because a video game that is single player doesn't sell well doesn't mean that single player games aren't selling well.
Here's my counterpoint to that, in that the reason I think that this movie shouldn't have been made and that I don't see a way for it to work well is because the things that I liked about Unbreakable and Split are very different. I like the movies individually, but I like them for different reasons. I'm not saying that that a sequel to Unbreakable doesn't work. That's not what I'm saying, because what I like about Unbreakable is the more grounded, realistic idea of maybe superheroes, maybe not. But what I liked about Split is this very nuanced, dynamic character struggling ultimately with himself and the different aspects of his personality, and those different aspects trying to all come out on top of each other. And those two things are completely disjointed. The fact that you take both of them and put them together is what doesn't work for me as a concept.
See, to put a capstone on that, because I do have a point on that, which I'd like to make. The concept of crossover movies or crossover merchandise of any sort is inherently campy.
Yeah.
And if it's going to work, you have to emphasize that and make it stand on its own. I think if this movie at least tonally stood on its own, it would be as a whole better.
It's true.
That's a fair
You know what?
point.
And yeah, you're right, because like Alien versus Predator doesn't necessarily ruin the original Alien or Predator.
It's just a bad movie.
Yeah, it's
You-
just a
you
bad
check
movie
out before you go to
because
see
they
the
don't
film.
make it campy enough.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, but
It's like Freddy versus Jason on the other hand.
right.
the one point I wanted to make, you were talking about with Split, the thing you liked about Split was having such a strong character, having it driven the whole movie.
Right.
In this movie, I feel like that was to its detriment because you had three really big characters
Right.
all
And there's not enough
competing
room for them.
on who can chew the most scenery.
And I think James McAvoy still did the best.
Yes,
I think
and
he's still the best thing
in
about Glass.
in a way, I felt like that was a problem though when I was
me too.
watching
Same.
it, because I was like, you're overemphasizing him, even though he's a great character and he's doing maybe the best performance in the movie. You're neglecting these other characters.
Well,
For a
right. It's like the
movie-
kid being like, "Hey, have you seen Split? It's really good. You know, like James McAvoy does a really good. You know, like and it's like the movie was telling you that.
Well, for a movie called Glass, Mr. Glass does not do anything in this movie until over halfway through the movie.
well,
Yeah,
well,
he just sits
also,
there
it's,
in a
it's the reason why like
catatonic state.
it, for me too, like it also like really helped to it was the final like stab wound in the horrible twists as well, because like they keep setting up like this movie has like a fucking Russian doll of bad twists.
Yep.
And why I was never caught off guard by any of them was because the film's called Glass. Glass is behind all of it. Duh. Like move on,
But
please.
also, like, I don't even think we see Samuel Jackson until 40 minutes into the movie.
Yeah.
And even so, then we've got like a good half an hour of him pretending to be catatonic and not doing anything. And he, like, the movie's fucking called Glass. But get rid of all of the goddamn bullshit preamble where we have Sarah Paulson trying to convince James McAvoy and Bruce Willis that they're not superheroes.
yeah, see
Get
here's
rid of all of that.
Here's the biggest reason why it was ineffective. Because first off, I respect the idea or the concept of keeping your villain mysterious and not showing much of them and leaving them as an overwhelming force. But we already have him in Unbreakable. We've already seen him built up. So he's not a monster. It's been made clear to us that he's a regular guy.
He is. Yeah, we know who. But also, they kind of break that in this movie, and I think that they ultimately make him out to be way more of an evil genius than he's ever presented as.
Right, for a film
Unbreakable.
that's supposed to be set up in the real world with actual superheroes and what would happen. Like, watch Death Note if you want to see something that's actually done well. Like
what
that.
What I like about Unbreakable is that Mr. Glass stylizes himself as an evil genius mastermind, but ultimately he's kind of not. You know?
And that's the thing. You know, the best villains don't think they're villains. They think in their own mind that they are doing
justified.
their own
Which,
sort of right
which
thing.
actually was probably the self-referential part that made me the angriest is when it's revealed that it's all being run by a black site like or Illuminati style like organization,
Secret society.
Yeah, secret society like
Clovers.
The
that has for 10,000 years been killing people with superhuman powers because there's no reason for gods to walk amongst us.
No, not because there's no reason for gods to not walk amongst us, but because, quote, it's not fair, unquote. Like, literally, that was her reason. It's not fair. And, but anyway, like,
I want to have superpowers.
the part that really pissed me off about like the meta of that was she said, but unlike in comic books, like our society like is actually doing it for good reasons. Like we actually believe we're doing it for the right reasons. Like, well, no shit, they do in comic books too.
Well, right, exactly. That's the villains never think that they're the villain.
Yeah.
Mr. Glass acknowledges that he's the villain, and that's his whole point.
Yeah, that was the biggest
If
part.
anything, that's what
When
makes him creative.
He was saying at one point he said, we'll be the villain team or something. To the
that
beast.
sounds like after he frees the beast, he's like, this sounds like the bad guys are teaming up.
Yeah,
Right, and
exactly.
That's where like that. They do it an obnoxious number of times before then, but that's where it ramps up just beyond belief. Because like the whole fight scene sequence is narrated by people just making meta commentary on
by
comic books.
Anya
It's like,
Taylor-Joy.
this is the point where this happens. This is the point where this now the two villains are split because one of the villains was inevitably trying to betray the other one, and so the hero of course has to step in now because he's been steadfast in his goodness.
I hate that every single one of these characters has a non-superhuman advocate in the movie, totally unnecessarily. Like, for some reason, Anya Taylor-Joy is Kevin's, and then you've got Mr. Glass's mother, and then you've got fucking Bruce Willis's son, and they got the same actor from Unbreakable, and he's not a good actor.
No, that's why I mentioned him in Unbreakable, because he gives an
really
awful
bad
performance in this.
But the fact that those three characters are there to constantly advocate for whichever person they're behind, and like you said, during the fight scene, it will cut away to one of them being like, in comic books, this is the point that this would happen, and it's like, what the fuck are you doing?
Yeah.
Why is this happening?
God.
And like half the time too, like that thing is actually happening.
Yes.
And then the other half of the time, that thing is not happening, but it's still just a different thing that would happen in comic books.
Absolutely. Well, there's a couple things I want to touch on before we go full hog into the second half, because I feel like once we get into that conversation, we ain't going back.
True.
So, first off, I want to talk about how they mentioned this comic at one point. It's called The Whisper Man.
Yes.
Oh.
And it was like, where are the parents?
Who are his parents?
Yeah. And when I saw that, I was just like, damn, this movie in a lot of ways is that exact thing. In the first half, it just whispers all the dumb shit it has. And then in the second half, it's just screaming it. And honestly, I appreciate it much more when it's just screaming the stupid shit rather than just mumbling it,
Yeah, and to be clear too, like it's whispering it, but it's whispering it constantly too at the beginning.
Yeah.
Like it's just like it doesn't stop.
Yeah, it's dumb as hell, but at least it could be entertaining.
No, I'm agreeing. I'm
which
just
is
saying,
the
like when you say
problem.
whispering, like that could conjure like subtlety when it's. And I'm just making it clear that it's not. I'm not disagreeing with the point.
Well, I think it's still dumb. I think it's subtle in a way.
I agree.
In that, it's not done enough.
Well, it's quiet. It's not subtle. It's
I guess that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, it's just not screaming it, but it's still making a shitty point. Yeah.
The other great part I wanted to mention is to fix Mr. Glass, they were going to do a surgery on him to fix his brain. Essentially just to make him dumb as hell, by shooting a laser at his head.
I mean, yeah, in the... I hate it because I have to defend the plot, and that makes me angry, but they are an evil organization, like they are trying to kill the superheroes.
Yeah, that's not
so their reason
until
was
the end, though.
Yeah, but at that point, that is why they were trying to do that. They were just
Sure.
trying to laser his head so that he wasn't a problem anymore.
That being said, I will go back to what we were talking about with Unbreakable, where like Mr. Glass stylizes himself to be like an evil genius, but he's kind of not. Whereas in this movie, he just full blown is.
Yeah.
Like he's like, even though he's been locked up since the year 2000, when he escapes, he goes down to the basement and we see him coding at like rapid speed. Like he would have had no access to a computer ever in any of the time that he was locked up. So the fact that he knows complex code and how to immediately get into all of these systems.
His mom mentions that he memorized the blueprints to the hospital to turn all of the electricity off at one point.
Also, let's talk about their way for keeping James McAvoy docile with the hypno lights, that every time he gets too close to the door, or if they flash the strobe lights, it forces another personality to come forward, and we see him trying to break out that one point by just backing up and then running at the door, and then it flashes and he turns into another person, then goes back. Why didn't he just cover his eyes?
Holy shit! I never thought about that.
Like at
Holy
first,
shit!
my train
close
of
your
thought,
eyes, man.
my train of thought going into that, I was
It's just like cyberbullying.
well,
Just
no,
close your fucking eyes.
I was thinking, why doesn't he just close his eyes? And I'm like, oh, well, when your eyes are closed, like you can still see light through your eyes. But like, just put a fucking hand over your eye.
Yeah.
And just
Yeah.
run at the door and walk over to the thing and turn it off.
Yep.
Just like just cover your eyes and walk over there and turn it off.
And like, sure, Ben, like it might have like come to you. It didn't really come to me either. But his character had 3 days in there.
Yeah, I mean,
20 whole days.
And 24 personalities to think about.
yeah,
that.
I will say I like that device of having it because it really
I thought it was fun too.
gave
Yeah.
McAvoy a chance to showcase all the different
It's
personalities.
It's a fun device for the film, but its rules are very easily
Oh,
broken.
absolutely! I
Like
think
everything
it's
about
dumb as hell.
Well, even
and
then, like honestly, like I think it could have been a fun premise, and it still could have even fit into a well-built world. You just would have had, I don't know, other mechanisms as well.
And also Bruce Willis's cell that's just full of water nozzles, so anytime he starts acting up, they just spray him with water and make the whole room super
just
wet.
like a dog. My favorite was they did that once, and then he gets up to talk to Sarah Paulson, and his clothes are just
dry.
completely dry. It's
no one gave a shit
what
about
the
continuity.
fuck?
And you can still hear water like dripping in the room, and the walls are all wet and everything, but his clothes are just dry.
Well, and, like also like his face was relatively dry too, except for he had like some droplets like makeup, like the makeup team placed.
How
on
much
his
do you want to
nose.
bet that it was just Bruce Willis being like, I don't want to be fucking wet for 5 hours?
I believe it was that, and I can't blame him.
No, me either.
Like
he was pulling a Harrison Ford in this one. He
was checked out,
he
and
was,
I respect that.
was,
if anything,
he was there to put in his time.
Like,
Bruce
Just-
Willis has been checked out for the last decade plus.
Yeah,
like,
honestly.
just drift his way right on through that movie.
yeah, and
Like,
I respect the
I re-
shit out of it.
I respect
oh my
it
God.
too.
I
thought
would
it was,
too. Yeah.
I thought it was funny compared to like how obviously hard James McAvoy was trying.
Right, how
Like,
flat Willis was.
And yeah, just like in comparison, like how obviously Bruce Willis did not want to be there, and James McAvoy was just like full on, just like doing his shit.
There were times in the movie where I straight up thought that like Willis's like flat acting was intentional. Like it was like he has to know what he's doing here. Like he knows what film he's on, and he's just like
Oh, he was just
Yeah.
totally checked out. Like I said, he pulled a Harrison Ford. Like he was just doing what he had to do to get through the filming of this movie. And I understand that and I respect that. I also respect James McAvoy for dedicating himself
110%,
so
yeah.
ferociously to such a dumb movie that he's
The
still like,
Nick Cage approach.
yeah. I think that exactly. I think even like the dumb moments with McAvoy, of which there are many. There are many. We won't get too deep into that right now because I think we still have some other things to talk about before the fun part.
I think we're just about ready to get
Yeah,
into
like
the
his
fight
his
scene.
hoots and growls.
Fantastic.
Just,
like
Amazing.
yeah.
were amazing, and like as amazingly terrible as they were, I find it hard to blame McAvoy for that. I feel like they were directorial.
Well, yeah, it's because he's supposed to.
He should
I
have
think they
understood it.
basically just told him to behave like a gorilla because that's what he does
Just an amalgam of all the spooky predators.
of the zoo that he worked at, right?
Yeah.
And you know what? Like that's one of those things where that in itself is inherently kind of stupid, so it falls on the director and the cinematographer and the editor to portray that in a way that doesn't look dumb.
Agreed.
And my favorite thing about the fight scene, and part of the reason why I enjoyed it so much, is because of how badly it's shot.
Unbelievably bad.
Because the whole thing is shot so statically and so like without any sort of stylistic flourishes that it's just James McAvoy shirtless, hooting and hollering and pounding on his chest and screaming at Bruce Willis standing outside in a rain poncho, and they're like wrestling. It reminded me very much.
It was hilarious.
It was hilarious. It was awesome. I loved it. It's like going to a family Thanksgiving and your drunk uncle gets in a fight with your tweaker cousin at the dinner table. and even the way that everybody was standing around watching it, it's like everybody was just kind of off to the side like, what? And it's just like this old man in a poncho and a crazy shirtless young guy, super veiny, like jacked up on PCP. It's just your drunk uncle and your tweaker cousin like smashing the fucking plates at Thanksgiving.
And
like,
there are no excuses for the shooting of this sequence too, because there are zero limitations like placed on this. Like it's a large green. There's an indoor space right next to it, and it's in the middle of the day. There are no challenges to the location.
Right.
Like the location is very easy to shoot in, yet it's shot terribly.
So I want to try
Where
to
to
explain
start?
this. So on one hand, I agree with you that it's shot very strangely, but I think because it's shot so strangely, it makes
It's
it
what makes it fun.
emphasizes
Oh, yeah, it makes
how
it fun to
dumb
pick
as
apart.
hell it is,
Yes,
and it makes me
absolutely.
like
I
it
agree.
more.
No,
Honestly,
no, 100%. 100%.
like I was saying before, it screams that it's dumb as hell in the second half.
But that's the thing, is that it's obviously not intentional.
No, it's in spite of itself.
It's hilarious in spite of itself, and that's why I like it so much, and that's what makes that sequence so fucking funny to watch, is because how sincerely it's treated, but just how badly it's done.
Again, yeah, and that's why I wish the whole movie was like that.
I agree.
There's one part where a bunch of the SWAT team shows up, and they're all like surrounding both of them with riot shields, and they're just they obviously that doesn't work, and they just get destroyed.
Well,
but
that's the
at one
problem
point,
with it.
yeah. At one point, Bruce Willis just takes a bunch of them and shoves them into a shipping container.
Where did that come
Yeah,
from? Why is
out
that
of
there?
nowhere.
Yeah, it's never shown on like
And then
in the same scene.
He's like, I'm doing this to protect you. And then slams the door shut. And not only does he slam the door shut, he takes a huge metal bar.
That's just
really
conveniently
thick,
right there.
really thick metal bar, puts it through the door and bends it so it can't
they
be
can't-
opened again.
I'm doing this to protect you.
And it's like obviously they're using like an aluminum rod, and again, it's just like it's your normal superhero standard fare. What really bothered me about that whole sequence, it was also the pacing of it. We see the SWAT guys pull up, and they attack both Willis and McAvoy, and there's a sort of sequence where it cuts back and forth between them both pushing against the riot shields in separate directions, and they each have about 5 riot guys between them, and it's demonstrating how strong they are. And that moment just wades in itself. Like it takes forever to show you that. Like, and there's like all these different shots you get of them, their feet, pushing against the riot shields. Meanwhile, like 5 minutes ago, Bruce Willis knocked a metal door off of its hinges. We
Right.
know he's strong, but they keep just having to bring this point home. And
Right.
it's like,
And also the fact that the cops never do anything to try to secure the pedestrians who are there. Like Anya Taylor-Joy and Bruce Willis's son are continually allowed
Just
to
walking up.
to just run into the melee and be like, but in comic books, this is the time. it's like get these people out of here.
Yeah.
Get them out of here.
like,
Why are you
is this like a black site facility
And
or
it's-
is it not?
And it leads to Anya Taylor-Joy being able to bring Kevin out into the light, as they say, through the power of love or whatever. What?
I thought that was corny as hell, and I
Literally,
kind of loved it.
Shyamalan sat down, watched King Kong, and said, "Beauty killed the beast." Oh,
Right. And also
fuck me, man.
Another thing, and it's like this is such a minor thing considering the numerous sins of this movie, but when she is there like holding his hand and she's like brought Kevin back and she put the beast away, and then the sniper behind her shoots him, a police sniper would never ever take that shot with a civilian standing right there.
Well, actually, no. God damn it, y'all keep having me putting me in a position where I have to defend the.
because
the
he's
shitty
part
one.
because he's part of the Illuminati or
Yeah,
whatever.
thank you. I didn't want to say
But
that.
like,
I do want to talk about that a little more because
let's talk about that and then wrap up.
okay, because what the fuck was that? Honestly, like, what was the point of having a secret society at all?
For there to be a movie.
For an excuse
Well, really, okay, so-
it's not even needed for the plot of the movie. Though.
Right.
to kill all of the main characters.
Okay, so here's the thing that really pissed me off about it personally. And that was that so much of the pronoun game needed to be played for that twist to work throughout the shitty waiting parts of that film. For instance, when all the characters are taken in, this is actually one of the things that pissed me off the most about the beginning part. All the characters are taken in, and the lead psychiatric Illuminati person sits down with him and says,
Paulson.
Sarah Paulson says, okay, hi, my job is to try and convince you guys that you're not superheroes. I have 3 days to do it. And then the conversation moves on. And so the film just presents you with this ticking clock and gives you
For
no
no
reason.
reason.
Well, no explanation. Like,
And does
it never
does continually have the sound of a ticking clock throughout most of the
Yeah,
movie.
and it's like, oh yeah, you've got 3 days to do this.
Why?
Why? Like,
And
just
that's
kill
the
them.
thing that bothered me the most about that secret society is, like, if their intent was to kill these guys, why are they even trying to convince
I mean,
them?
maybe their first line of defense is to try to convince them they're not superheroes and then kill them if they don't. But also, okay, how did nobody see the one Illuminati SWAT guy drowning Bruce Willis in that puddle? How did
Yeah.
nobody see that happening?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the thing too. Like the
Also, why did Sarah Paulson go there and while he's being drowned, tell her to take his hand so with his superpowers he can see that she was part of the secret society all along? Exposition, I guess?
right. Yeah, that's the only
Oh,
reason.
God,
And,
it was dumb as hell.
They're just let's talk about like why they are the worst secret society ever.
Okay, if they were doing
they also
this for-
let the people go, like all the periphery
They
people.
were apparently doing this for 10,000 years, yet they have no preparation for what could happen.
Yeah.
Right.
No preparation, and also they must not take their jobs that seriously because like the witnesses, like all the people who are tied to the heroes in ham-fisted ways, are all just allowed to let go.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Why? Why would you not kill them too? Like salt the earth. Like what is going on?
Right, exactly. No fucking witnesses.
Yeah.
And then it's revealed that Mr. Glass's plan all along was to have the fight there so that the hospital's security cameras could catch the whole thing and he could live stream it to the internet.
Yep.
So it would prove to people that there were superhumans out
Right.
there.
Well, yeah, it was.
and that foiled the secret
It
society.
was like it was like
Well,
to
the thing is, they don't even treat it as a way to foil the secret society, which would have made more sense. Like, just oh yeah, he uses an opportunity to expose this group. Instead, it's built around to expose that there are superheroes.
Yeah, he wants to like bring to life heroes that are laden, I guess, or like not active. Also, it was streamed to a private server, and then after his death, I guess he had it automatically send to his mom, and
and
then
also to Anya Taylor-Joy, and also to Bruce Willis's son.
yeah, and oh my God, when it sent to
they're all
his
good for that,
mom,
too. That's what
and
baffled
she
me.
checked it on her like 2002 era iMac, I was just like, how the fuck is this computer even still
running,
working? Yeah.
Also,
Like we used to have one of those.
also, like, how did he know about the existence of Anya Taylor-Joy's character in order to set up sending that to her? And even if he was aware of her existence, why would he decide to send that to her specifically, or to Bruce Willis's son? It's just they had to tie it up and be like, the secret society thought they could get away with culling the idea that they're superheroes. And then the very final scene to have the three of them meet in the train station 2 hours after uploading it and watch in real time as everybody in the train station sees the videos on
Right.
their
Let's
phone.
talk about what would have actually happened there. You know, if this is built in like a realism world, people would have looked at their phone
People
and
would
said,
have seen that on
"That's a
Facebook.
cool. That's a cool YouTube video."
Yeah,
like,
there's some cool special
Yeah.
effects.
yeah,
Yeah,
and they would have put
exactly.
it down. Like you would not have.
It
like,
would not have been a thing at all. Okay, so one funny thing, Mr. Glass's original plan was to quote unquote original plan. It wasn't his actual plan as we know, but his original plan was there's this new big Osaka building being made in Philadelphia that looks suspiciously like the Twin Towers. Did you guys get that too?
A little bit.
Well,
There was like a
I think it's
little
just, like, to
bit
kinda
of a
bring-
gap in the middle,
Well-
even, and like it looked like the Twin Towers.
Yeah, no, it was just a way to kind of I think it was intentional because glass has been made to be a terrorist. Like, and
Well, right,
it's to
and
set
well,
you up to think he's gonna, and he says he's gonna blow them up. Like, it's
his quote unquote plan is to have the Beast and Bruce Willis fight there,
Like,
and blow up the building.
Yeah.
So
that whole time I was really worried that fight was actually going to happen because it did look so much like the Twin Towers. And I was just like, it's been a while, but that's still kind of distasteful to have a climactic fight at a
Absolutely.
even
building
then,
that looks exactly.
I mean, that being said,
it was like just enough.
Oh, you're
That-
saying
that-
9/11 was distasteful?
No.
Oh, okay. The way it's in the movie.
That being
Okay.
said, in
fucking-
just about every Marvel superhero movie or DC, these fights take place in major cities, usually New York, and involve lots of large buildings falling down. So I don't think that's something that's exclusive to
I
this
almost
movie.
half expected them to, because Mr. Glass was originally going to blow up the chemicals in the building. And I thought originally what he was going to do when he was doing all that typing was he was going to, even after he died, have it explode so superheroes in the world would be forced to save it. That would be dumb as hell.
Yeah, I'm glad that
but,
didn't happen. I mean, the ending
but
as it was pretty also.
Yeah,
also
but
trash.
somehow he went with something, I would say, even dumber.
I mean, I kind of figured they weren't going to make it to the towers when an hour and 40 minutes of the runtime had already passed.
See, I wasn't watching the clock that hard. So.
I was feeling the clock. I wasn't looking at the clock ever, but I knew it had to have been.
You guys good rating it?
Yeah, let's go.
Okay, I'll just make this my rating. So this movie is dumb as hell. I will say I was very entertained in the last 45 minutes, but the problem with it is the last 45 minutes being dumb as hell and screaming how dumb as hell it is really undermines the rest of the movie, which tries hard to be serious and fails at it. I wish it was dumb as hell and was just screaming that throughout the whole movie, but unfortunately it was not. So while it was very enjoyable in the last 45 minutes, it is still a very bad movie. I'm going to give it a 2.5, actually. I'm going to give it a 2.5. Very low 2.5. I was leaning towards 2, but I'll go 2.5.
Yeah, I can agree with a lot of that. Like, I only started enjoying it when it got really fucking stupid, but a lot of that felt really undeserved as well. And the fact that I had to sit through well over an hour of just boring, almost recapping and rehashing shit from the previous two movies. I can't say that I would want to sit through all of that again just for the fun, stupid payoff.
You
at
couldn't
the
strap
end.
me down.
So yeah, I'm gonna give it a 2 out of 5. I've definitely seen worse, but I ultimately think that there's no reason for this movie to have been made, and I'll stand by that. Enjoy Split and Unbreakable as their own standalone things, and just avoid Glass, I would say.
I'm. It's hard for me to think of a time I've regretted seeing a movie. I loathe this film.
Was this worse than The Nun for you?
I honestly hold them on about the same point. This
Would
film,
you say your expectations for this were higher than The Nun?
they're about the same. I think going in,
Okay.
I was both like, this probably isn't going to be good, and
Because-
I was like astounded by how terrible they were.
Because you were saying this, you never regretted seeing a movie more, and I think communally that's probably the other worst experience.
No. It's worth bringing up. I really regret both those films, but this one to me almost felt even more personal. I don't even know if I had that much fun with the ladder sequence. Like, it was fun picking it apart, but even then it was very easy to pick apart. It was, for me, only really the last 20 minutes of that film. I'm just looking back at sequences through that film, and I just see black. Like, I'm just mad.
No holds barred, my dude.
And how
yeah.
terrible that film was for me. I wouldn't wish that movie on anyone again. Like, I was giggling along once or twice, but I was groaning and just what the fuck are you doing nonstop? Yeah, no, it's a 1. It's a 1. Like, I hated it. I absolutely hated it.
Okay, yeah, well, that's an average of 1.8 out of 5 for Glass. Yeah, it's a pretty dumb bad movie, and I think I even despite the fun that I had at the end of it, I can say that it's a pretty safe movie to avoid.
I would definitely not see it in the theaters.
Oh God, no.
And even
God,
then,
no.
and then honestly, like if you've seen the other two, if you stream it or however else you watch it, then just cut to the end. Don't do that.
Yeah, and I'll even contend, like it's not M. Night's worst movie
It's
by
not.
any means.
I don't think so either.
I'd probably put it in the middle of
Avatar's
his
still pretty
quality.
bad. Which I mean is just a testament, right? I mean that film isn't even his worst. Like, good God, you're right though. Like,
Yeah.
like Avatar's horrid. Like, there's wow, man.
Yeah, Glass isn't a good movie. I didn't find it quite as offensive as you did, but it's definitely not a good movie.
Yeah. Unbreakable trilogy, more like Unforgivable trilogy.
Yeah, seriously.
I want to give 2 shout-outs before we finish up here.
Okay.
One to Salt Bay, who got a
Let's
very...
just say this episode was sponsored by.
You want to do the...
No.
Okay.
I'm too tired.
Okay.
Blame the movie if you're sad you didn't get a sponsor this one. It's Glass's fault.
Salt Bay got a very dated reference in the very beginning of the movie.
Well, wait. You know what? Maybe I should do a sponsorship for this. Or maybe Mrs. What was her name? Who did our sponsorship last week?
Clotilda?
Clotilda. Maybe Clotilda should do one. I think that's only fair. Let me go get her real quick.
Okay.
Oh shit, guys. We have a bit of a problem. Or a bit of a twist. Clotilda's killed herself.
Oh no.
She saw Glass and she couldn't handle it even more than I could, and she just had a sign around herself that just said saw Glass, can't unsee. So sorry for that shitty twist, but I guess there actually isn't a sponsorship after all.
Damn. Subverting expectations yet again.
Bye, Clotilda.
Oh, special shout out to the really weird and unnecessary M. Night cameo.
Oh, it was so
God.
bad. Oh yeah, where like not only do we see him again playing the same character as he was in Unbreakable, instead of having like some subtle tie-in saying like he's the same guy from Unbreakable, he literally turns around and just says, "Oh, hi. You look familiar, Mr. Bruce Willis."
Didn't you used to work at the football stadium?
Who I would have seen you once in a massive crowd of people of, like, and there's no way on
You
God's
patted
green
me
earth.
down one time. I used to get into some shady stuff in my younger days, but I turned it around through the power of positive thinking. Okay, bye.
Yeah,
Like, what the fuck?
literally the worst.
No, that was so
man.
Literally the
stupid.
worst. And the movie was just full of little moments like
All
that.
right.
Like, yeah.
Well, that'll bring us to the end of this week's episode. Next week, it's my choice. Going to be talking about one of my favorite horror films of all time, Clive Barker's original Hellraiser. I'm super stoked.
Gonna raise hell, gonna raise hell.
Yeah, I'm super stoked to watch this movie and get to talk about it. It's going to be really exciting. If you're a fan of Hellraiser, or even if you're not, check back in next week,
I'm not a fan of Hellraiser.
because you haven't seen it.
Exactly. I'm pretty excited to see it, though. It's going to be good.
Yeah, you're about to be a fan of Hellraiser. But if you like the show, leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever else you get your podcasts. Follow us on Twitter at PodPeoplePod for stuff and things.
Share with a friend too.
Share our links and shit like that. Follow us on Letterboxd if you want at letterboxd.com/podpeoplepod, where we have a list of all the films we've talked about on the show with our average ratings and links to the episodes in which we talk about those. Share those with your friends as well. Follow me on Twitter at Mr. Van Awesome if you want.
I'm at Mr. Sheets.
I'm occasionally tweeting for Light Arc Studio because we've got It Stares Back coming out. You've heard the
Yay.
plug. Get excited. It's going to be good. And you can also find my work on ArtStation as well under Cleveland Mosier or Iron Prism.
Better work than fucking Glass was, that's for sure. But yeah, thank you as always for listening. And we're the Pod People. Until next time, drink milk and reinforce your bones.
First name Mr., last name Glass.
Goodbye.